so let's start then. Fine. So if you remember a while ago, we dealt with when we were dealing with the understanding of the Yerushalmi as to Zichron Trua. So we noted that the Bavli, at least the simple understanding, we raised some other understandings, doesn't seem to, in the end of the day, buy the Yerushalmi's understanding that Zichron Trua reflects a fundamentally different type of Rosh Hashanah than Rosh Hashanah on Chol and Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat. But the Bavli never explains what it thinks that the words Zichron Trua actually mean, right? In its final analysis, right? In its Hava Amina, it understood it like the Yerushalmi, that there's a fundamental difference between Rosh Hashanah that falls during the week and Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbat. But by the end of that, it seems to have rejected that notion, unless you take one of the hybrid positions that Zichron Trua means that you don't have to blow the shofar, and then the Gzeir of Rabbah tells you that you shouldn't, or something like that. But again, the simple understanding is that it just rejects it. So we briefly got into the question, okay, well, what does Zichron Trua mean? And we saw that there are, if you remember, right, how did Rashi understand the phrase Zichron Trua?
As the psukim. Right,
so you can, take it away, Gavi.
Zichron, psuke, Zichronot, psuke, Shofarot. So Zichron is the psukim about Zichronot and the psukim of Shofarot. To remind you of Akira Yitzchak when Abraham brought the ayah instead.
Right. So Rashi says that basically the Havamina, the Bavli, the Maskana of the Yerushalmi is that Yom Truah reflects a day on which you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Zichron Truah reflects a day in which you talk about shofar, meaning that Truah or Yom Truah is an either-or scenario. And Rashi seems to say that no, Rosh Hashanah is both Yom Truah, and Yom Zichron Truah simultaneously, right? It's an and specifically Rashi says that the Truah reflects the blowing of the shofar, and Zichron Truah reflects the recitation of the psukim that accompany the blowing of the shofar. The implication of Rashi is that the recitation of these psukim is d'oraita, is biblical. And when we looked at it the first time, the main, probably most vocal critic of this position of Rashi, that the words Zichron Trua mean that you should say psukim about the shofar blasts on Rosh Hashanah, was the Ramban. So let me just close my WhatsApp because it's beeping and it's annoying. Right, was the Ramban. Now, what does the Ramban? What does the Ramban say? Right, the Ramban, if you remember, let's see, if you remember, or just take it up from the, come on, share. There we go. Right, so what does the Ramban say?
Ramban.
Take it away, either of you. Go ahead.
So Zichron Trua. So Psuke Zichronos, Psuke Shofaros. Liskor Lefem Akedis Yitzchak. Right? Shekara Tachtov Ayo. Lashon Rashi. So it quotes Rashi saying that the reason is because of the aisle that was brought instead. Is right. V'hayot Sarif Harav L'Havi Gam B'Suke Hamalchios. Right, that he needs to also, he should bring psukim of Malchuyot.
Right. So first, right, the first problem the Ramban has is once you're talking in the psukim, why do you identify only Zichronot and Shofarot and not Malchuyot? Because as we know, we say all three. Right. That's his first, right, critique. Right. That's Rashi, that's the Ramban's first critique. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Can I keep going?
Yeah.
Midrash Shalo Yisakein Yizkor Hakasav Psuke has Zichronos the shofaros, the lo yizkor hamalchios. So it's from the midrash, right? That it's shelo yisaken, that it's not like fixed.
It's not possible, right? Lo yitachen in modern Hebrew also, it means it's not possible. Right.
Right. That you should remember the pasuk of Zichronos and Shofaros and not remember the pasuk of not remember Malchuyot. Ukavar darshu osam me pasuk v'yulachem zichron.
The zikaron.
The zikaron lifnei Hashem elokeitem. Zikaron rather lifnei Hashem elokeitem. So it was already doresh. It was already explained. It already explained them from the pasuk but and it should be your remembrance before that. That it's not that it didn't teach you Ani Hashem Elokeitem, right? How does that?
Right. I mean, what does that tell you, right? What does this add? Right. So Ella.
Right. Ella is that binyan av, right? Right. It's the binyan av, meaning it's
teaching as a universal rule, right? A generalizable principle, meaning that kol makom shata omer zichronot ata somech lemed malchuyot. That whenever you say zichronot, you must have malchuyot. So first question Ramban has is, you should say all of them. Okay, fine. But his bigger problem is that Rashi implies that the recitation of the psukim of Malchuyot or Zichronot or Shofarot is biblical, and the Ramban says, right, his main critique is Aval.
Right, kol zeh asmachta v'divrei right, it's an asmachta.
Right, it's only rabbinic. Right, it's only an asmachta. That's not what the pasuk means. Yeah, and what's his proof?
It being, meaning meaning when he's saying it's an asmachta, what exactly he's talking about?
He's saying the pasuk that we'll see that the Gemara invokes in Rosh Hashanah, that you're supposed to say psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot, that can't actually be the drasha. That can't actually mean what the pasuk means. It can't be biblical. What's his proof? How does he know it's only rabbinic? So the answer is Rosh Hashanah Lamed Daled, which is
right. Because, right, what we say is derabbanan.
Right.
Right. That you should go to where they're blowing the shofar, and the prelude to this is that you only have the option to go to one, but you should go to the place where they're blowing and not where the place
exactly
where they're
right. Meaning the Gemara explicitly puts a competition between them. Is if I only have a choice to do one, so meaning go to a place where they're davening and say the psukim, or go to a place where there's a shofar and hear the shofar. The Gemara says go to the shofar and says very explicitly, because one is d'oraita and one is d'rabbanan. Right? So the Ramban says, right? Because pshita ha d'oraita ha d'rabbanan. And then the Gemara's answer was lo tzricha da'afal gav da'avat ayasafik. That the case is where you're not sure if you're going to catch shofar blowing, even if you go to the place where you think there's a shofar, but you know that you'll catch davening. So then you might have thought that if I'm not sure I'm going to get shofar, I might as well catch davening for sure. And the Gemara answers that's not true. Right? You should always try for the d'oraita. Okay?
Right.
So then how does the Ramban understand the word zichron trua?
Right. Avol zichron trua, kamo yom trua yelatan. It's the same. It's like, or it operates the same as yom trua yelatan. Yomar shenria b'yom hazeh.
Right. So it says, right. What does Zichron Trua tell us according to the Ramban?
How does that word reach Shenaria?
Shenaria, that you should say a trua, meaning you should blow the shofar.
You should blow on this day, and it will be it'll be remembrance for you before Hashem. Right, like it says over there, the that you should blow the trumpets in of the remembrance before Hashem. Right?
Simchatchem. Right. So the Ramban says, what does Trua, Yom Trua means? Blow the shofar. What does Yom Zichron Trua mean?
Remember.
Meaning, it's not what you do, it's what the result of the Trua will be. If you blow the shofar, then God will remember you. Right? And therefore, they're both true. Okay. So what I want to focus on is this question. The saying, the psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot, is that biblical or is it rabbinic? Right? Rashi seems to stake out the position that it's biblical, and as we'll see, he does that in other places as well. And the Ramban stakes out the position that it's rabbinic. And what we need to do is figure out, well, why do they say what they say? And, right, as we'll see, it's not so clear, because different passages in the Gemara imply different things, and what we need to do is defend, well, both of them. Right? We need to figure out how the Ramban reads all three relevant Gemaras, and how Rashi defends all three relevant Gemaras, and what that tells us about the nature of the obligation to say the psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot. So let's start with the of the three Gemaras that we'll see, the one that the Ramban takes as his primary proof. Right, his proof that saying the psukim is only derabanan, right, and that's the Gemara and Lamed Daled Amud Beis that we already hinted at, but let's see it inside. Okay, so right, the Gemara there says, right, Tanya Nami Achi Kishu Shoman Ala Seder. When you hear the shofar, you hear it in order. Val Seder Abrachot, and in order of the brachot. B'medvar Mamurim B'chaverir. That's if you're in a minyan. If you're not in a minyan, you can hear them out of order. Okay. Brachot, v'yachid shlo taka, chavir tokei lo. If you don't blow a shofar, someone can blow for you. V'yachid shlo berach, ein chavir mevarach alav. But your friend can't make the bracha for you. Okay. U'mitzvah betoken yoter min ha-mevarchen. And here's the key line for the Ramban. The mitzvah of blowing the shofar is greater than that of the brachot, which include Malchuyot, the psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofar. And then the Gemara tells you, Ketzad, what's the case? Shtei ayarot, if you have two cities, ba'achat token, in one place they're blowing the shofar, uba'achat mivarchit, and in one place they are davening. Holchin l'makom shetokin, ve'en holchin l'makom shemivarchin. If you have to choose, again, the assumption here is presumably you don't know the psukim, so you won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah yourself, and you can't blow shofar, so you have to go somewhere. So what do? So the Gemara says, Pshita, obviously go to the place where they're blowing the shofar. Ha-d'oraita v'ha-d'rabanan. Because blowing the shofar is biblical, and saying the psukim is d'rabanan. So the Gemara answers, Lo shricha da'av al-gav da'havadai v'ha-safek. It's a case where you know that you'll manage to catch davening, but you don't know if you'll catch shofar. So the Gemara is telling you that since shofar is biblical, even though it's only doubtful that you'll catch the shofar, it's better to doubtfully catch the shofar than vadai catch davening with the psukim. And this is the Ramban's main proof. Right? This is the Ramban's main proof. Is look, you got an explicit Gemara. Not only does it say that shofar blowing is d'oraita and saying the psukim is d'rabanan, it puts a conflict between them and makes it very clear. Right? Shofar, higher on the hierarchy, then the psukim, because one is biblical and one is rabbinic. It's very hard to read this Gemara any other way, and that's the Ramban's central proof. Right? That is the Ramban's central proof. So now let's defend Rashi. Okay, Rashi is a bit more complicated, but why does Rashi think that the recitation of the psukim, that davening, essentially, on Rosh Hashanah is biblical? Right? What would drive Rashi to stake out that position? Okay? So there are two Gemaras that might do it, and once we see all three Gemaras, then we've got to explain all three according to the Ramban, and all three according to Rashi, to stake out basically these two representative positions in the Rishonim. Okay? So, Gavi, why don't you take Rosh Hashanah Tet Zayin?
Mipnei ma'amra Torah nisum mayim b'chag. So why did the Torah say to do nisum hamayim on Sukkot? So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu nisum l'fanai mayim b'chag k'dei she'yifrachu l'chan b'shmei shana. So do nisum hamayim on Sukkot in order to have the bracha of rain during the year. Zamru mipnei l'fanai ROSH HASHANA Zichronot and say in front of the Shofar, Malchuyot Zichronot. So say Malchuyot in order to coronate me upon you. Zichronot Zichronechem L'fanai Tova. Zichronot in order to have your remembrance in front of me for good. And what is the vessel through which that happens? The shofar.
Good. So for now, we're going to bracket the Ramban's first question, which is, why does Rashi only mention Zichronot and Shofarot and not Malchuyot? Let's, for the moment, treat all the psukim as one. Okay? So, this Gemara, what does it sound like? Is the saying of the psukim D'oraita or D'Rabbanan?
Depends how you treat the
Okay, good. So let's start with the simple one, right? It clearly says that Umra Torah, meaning, what in this passage would push us in the direction that saying the psukim is biblical? Right there, the answer is obvious. Umra Torah, right? It says the Torah says, right? So if Rashi wants a place that says,
talking about the.
So it sounds like the framing for these two sentences, right? Why does the Torah say to do this, right? So the Torah tells you to do Nisach HaMayim, and the Torah tells you to say the Psukim Rosh Hashanah. So if you want to look at this unit and say it supports the notion that saying the Psukim is fundamental to Rosh Hashanah, it's biblical, the support would simply be the words Amra Torah. The Torah said, which sounds biblical, right? Sounds biblical. Okay, so here, it's a check for Rashi. There's an easy way to read this in accordance with Rashi. How is the Ramban going to defend himself and say, no, it's not D'oraita?
I mean, I would assume because it's not pasuk.
Right, so first of all, he'll note, it doesn't actually quote a pasuk, right? It doesn't quote a pasuk. Right? So that's good, which that already is good reason to believe that Umra Torah might be a looser statement than it sounds like at first glance, right? Because Umra Torah, give me a pasuk. It doesn't give me a pasuk. The Torah says, whatever that means, right? Or the Ramban will say, as he actually says, which is asmachta, right? Even if you can find me a pasuk, and the pasuk is, let's say, Zichron Trua. So just say it's an asmachta, big deal. It's not actually pshat. And the third point, which Gavi said to me before on WhatsApp, which is, right, what's the third possible out for the Ramban here?
That this isn't really based in a deal, right? But just because it says it in a Agadic.
Right, the third is that the whole passage is Agadic. So, right, it's one thing to write off a phrase in a halachic sounding Gemara where it quotes a pasuk. So then you'd have to really go for asmachta. Here you may not even need to go that far. You could just say, whatever. It's an Agadic statement. It's an Agadic passage. In an Agadic passage, the language can be much looser. Right? Because it's not making a halachic point. It's making a hashkafic point. It's making a philosophical point. It's making a philosophical point. So the language, don't be married to the formal sounding language. It's not a formal passage to begin with. It's an Agadic passage. It's making a point. It's telling you what you should be thinking about on Rosh Hashanah. Good. So the support here for Rashi is that it says Amra Torah. But this is easily parried by the Ramban. Because maybe Amra Torah doesn't mean Amra Torah. There is no pasuk it's quoting. It's an Agadic passage. Doesn't bother me so much. Okay? The bigger problem for the Ramban, and this is the one that really supports Rashi, is the Gemara on Daf Lamed Bet. Right? And this is where things really get tricky. Okay? So let's see the Gemara on Lamed Bet. Well, Yodi, you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. All right. So Seder brachos, the order of brachos, right? For the Rosh Hashanah, the Tefillah.
Right. This is Rosh Hashanah Musaf.
Rosh Hashanah Musaf, right? Omer avos v'guros v'kedushas l'shem. So you start off with the first three brachos. Kol malchuyot imam, and you include malchuyot with them, right? The Eino Tokia, you don't blow the shofar after that. Kedushas hayom v'tokia, you say Kedushas hayom, and you blow the shofar. The Zichronos v'tokia, you do the Zichronos, and you blow the shofar. And the shofaros, the other part of it, you do the shofaros, and the Eino of the Omer, Avoda Voda, Birchas Kohanim.
Right, so and then you say the three last brachot, right? That's Rabbi Yochanan Nuri. Okay.
Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, im eino tequila malchuyot, lamu masker. If you don't blow by the malchuyot, by the initial malchuyot, why are you remembering? Meaning those are supposed to go hand in hand, right?
Good.
Right? Ela Omer Avo, so what does he said to do? Ela Omer Avos V'Guros Kedushas Hashem V'Kol Malchuyos Im Kedushas Hayom Atiyah. Say the first three, and then
Right, include Malchuyot in Kedushat Hayom in the fourth bracha and blow the shofar. That's what we do, right?
Right. Right. And then Zichronos V'Tekiyah, Shoros V'Tekiyah, V'Omer Avo. So right, exactly, and that's what we do.
Very good. So now the Gemara picks up on a very strange phrase of Rabbi Kiva, right? Rabbi Kiva said in the Mishnah, "In eino tokeya lamalchiot lamalu maskir." If you're not blowing the shofar, so why do you, for malchiot? So why do you say the psukim of malchiot? Okay, so here Rabbi Kiva, the Gemara picks up and says, "Amar lo Rabbi Kiva, yeah."
Amar lo Rabbi Kiva, im eino Lamahu masker, right? So Lamahu masker repeats it. Omar, it's fine, doctor. The Torah says that you should remember, right? El Lama Esther. So rather, why 10 brachos?
Right.
Tisha, why not have 9? One is different. I just want to go on point.
Right? Good. So here's the problem. What does Rabbi Kiva seem to say? Rabbi Kiva says, right, the Gemara says, if you're not going to blow shofar, so don't bother saying the psukim. And the Gemara says, what do you mean don't say the psukim? How could you not say the psukim of Malchuyot? Rachmana Amar Idkar. The Torah says, say the psukim. Right? The Torah says, say the psukim. So you can't ever not say the psukim, and the Gemara buys it and says, you're right. No one ever said don't say the psukim. They said you don't have to say as many psukim, but the fact that you're going to say the psukim is indeed a given. Right? And here the Gemara uses Rachmana Idkar. Right? And Rashi takes it as obvious. Right? Rachmana Idkar Kedetanya, right? L'kaman. Yeah. It is, the Torah said, mention it. Right? As it says later on. Right? Where does it say it?
That we read before.
Right, so right, in the continuation, right, it says Idkar. So, right here, right, Rashi has yet another case where the Gemara seems to say that the saying of Psukim is D'oraita. Right? It said, and this time it's not in a hashkafic context as much, it's in a, right, it's in a halachic context. Right? It's an halachic context. Sorry. I should have given you the next line in the Gemara, so I'm going to give you the next line in the Gemara now. Right? I thought I did, but here we go. right? And he says, the next line of the Gemara is, Uminayin sha'omrim Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Rabbi Elazar Amar Dichtiv Shabbaton Zichron Shua Mikra Kodesh Shabbaton Kedushat Hayom Zichron Elu Zichronot Trua Elu Shofarot Mikra Kodesh Kacheo Vasiyat Melacha. Because, and the next line of the Gemara is, how do you know you say Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot? Because the pasuk says Zichron Trua, right? And Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, "Mibnei malo nemar Shabbaton Shvot," etc. Okay, and then he says, "Minayin she'omrim Malchuyot." How do you say Malchuyot? Tanya Rabbi Omer, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, v'chodesh Hashvi zu Malchut. So you see that in the continuation of the Gemara in fact quotes psukim for saying all the psukim. But by the way, this is the answer to the Ramban. Why does Rashi not think that you derive Malchuyot from Zichron Trua? Right? Because he does think it's Doraita, he just thinks it comes from another pasuk. Right? The Zichronot and Shofarot come from Zichron Trua, and Malchuyot comes from Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right? Right? From a different pasuk. So they're all Doraita, but from different psukim. And that's how Rashi reads it. So now we got to deal with the question of, okay, so I should just add it here, so it's here. One second, so we'll do this. 6 through 8 here. Okay. So what will the Ramban have to do to defend this? Right now we have a pasuk, and it sounds like a halachic context. So what's the Ramban going to do to defend? Right, to defend himself? Yeah, that's machta. Right. So in the end of the day, the answer for the Ramban for every counterproof in the Gemara is asmachta, asmachta, asmachta. Right? You're right. It says Amra Torah. It says it karachmana. But why do you think the Ramban gives gives the most weight to the Gemara on Lamed Daled? Right? Why? Right? We have two Gemaras that could easily be read as saying there is a biblical mitzvah, and the second one even quotes psukim. But why does the Ramban give prime, halachic weight to the Gemara on Lamed Daled? Right? What motivates the Ramban to read both Daf Tet Zayin and Lamed Bet as an asmachta?
Because on the Daled it says that it's Derabanan.
So first of all, right, the Gemara there says Derabanan quite explicitly, and therefore, once you have a Gemara that says explicitly it's Derabanan, so then you have to reread the other Gemara in light of that, right? And what's, I think, the second thing that's motivating the Ramban?
It doesn't stop citing an exact pasuk as well. It's saying the Torah says this.
Right, so that's true on Daf Tet Zayin. On Lamed Bet, it quotes a pasuk. But what is really for the Ramban, besides the fact that it says Derabanan, which is already pretty good, right? The Gemara on Lamed Daled does something else that the other two Gemara don't do, which is it has a halachic nafkamina, meaning it says because this is only Derabanan and that is Doraita. I mean, because saying the psukim is only Derabanan and blowing the shofar is Doraita, this is what that tells you lemaaseh. Right? Practically, it gives you a halachic implication. You can't read off a halachic implication as an asmachta. Right? There's a consequences to calling it derabanan in that sugya, which is, right, the consequence of it in that sugya is try to hear the blowing of the shofar, even in a case where it's only a suffix, rather than say the psukim. So there's a nafkamina to calling it derabanan. It's not just that it calls it derabanan. There are consequences. And therefore the Ramban, I think, for that reason alone, is very comfortable reading all the other sugyot as asmachtas, derabbanans, and I gave you just here the Turei Even, who's basically summarizing many of the Sephardi Rishonim, like the Ran, but he was on Sephardi, so it was easy just to add, where he says, Lav Dafka, and therefore every time it says the Torah said, it doesn't mean it. De'enan ela miderabbanan. Proof? The Gemara on Lamed Daled, where the Gemara calls it derabbanan, gives you a nafkamina, so you have to say everything else in us is a smachta. Okay, what I want to do, either today, or probably today and tomorrow, is the Ramban is relatively easy. Meaning the Ramban just says, look, I have one Gemara that tells me it's derabbanan, it tells me a nafkamina, it seems very, very much that there's no two ways about it, so every time it sounds like it's d'oraita, just read it off as an asmachta, that's his move. Right? That's easy. Rashi has a harder time, because Rashi, it's true that he has two Gemaras that plausibly call it d'oraita, one which says Amra Torah, and one where it says Rachmana Amar Idkar, but at the end of the day, he needs to contend with a Gemara on Lamed Daled that says it's derabbanan, and there are consequences to it being derabbanan, such that you prioritize even Safek blowing the shofar over Vadai saying the psukim. So what we got to do is figure out, then what does Rashi think? Right? How does Rashi deal with the Gemara on Lamed Daled? Okay, that's what I want to deal with. Okay, so before I gave you I don't know, you know how many answers in the Achronim, because everyone wants to try to defend Rashi's position. But I want to hear what you think, and we'll go through the answers. Right? First, I'll start with what you think. Give me different defenses of Rashi. If I know of an Achron that said that, then we'll look at it inside. And if not, we'll see the suggestions, and each of them will present a different model in terms of how we're supposed to understand the value for Rashi, the biblical value of saying the psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofar. And again, the first question of the Ramban doesn't really bother me, right? Because Rashi thinks all three are d'oraita, but as it's clear in the continuation of the Gemara on Rosh Hashanah Lamed Bet, Shofarot and Zichronot are derived from Zichron Trua, and Malchuyot is derived from the fact that in the context of Rosh Hashanah, the pasuk says Ani Hashem Elokeichem, which for the Gemara is, if I declare that I'm God, that must mean that in Rosh Hashanah you're supposed to say something about God being His essential self, which is King, or something like that, right? So he can hold that they're all d'oraita and just hold that they come from different psukim, right? That doesn't bother me so much. And on Al Torah, Rashi's only explaining the word Zichron Trua. He's not writing a halachic work, he's defining the phrase. Okay. So good. What do you think? How do we defend Rashi, who in the end of the day seems to think that it is biblical, giving pride of place to the Gemara on Ted Zayin and the Gemara on Lamed Bet? How is he going to explain away the Gemara on Lamed Daled that very explicitly says the psukim are derabbanan, and therefore you give precedence to even a doubtful blowing of the shofar over a certain recitation of the psukim? What do you think? Right? How are we going to defend Rashi?
Gemara is just going with a specific case, and it doesn't spill over to the general halacha.
Okay, so what's the case?
One case where you have to decide this is where you should choose.
Okay, but the Gemara says d'oraita versus derabbanan, right? Meaning it's not just that it makes you choose. It says the reason you choose is because blowing shofar is biblical and saying the psukim is derabbanan, right? So there's a consequence and an explanation. It's a pretty, right? You really need to defend that somehow. So right? Push it farther. Right, let's defend Rashi. As many defenses as you can get, or the ones that are most plausible to you.
The psukim versus the bracha itself.
Meaning, okay, spell it out for me.
Saying the psukim themselves, saying the psukim is d'oraita, but which psukim and how you order and how you say it in the full bracha, the bracha itself is d'oraita.
Very good. So one of the central answers that's found in the Achronim is some version, right? There are many versions of this, but some version of what Gavi said, right? Which is that maybe, right, you have to be careful and say that either, Gavi actually said two different things. One is that maybe the brachot are derabanan and the psukim are deoraita, and the Ramban is only assuming that the brachot mean the brachot and the psukim. The other is, right, Gavi really said two things, and the Achronim say both of what you just said. Right? One is maybe the brachot are derabanan, but the psukim are deoraita. Or, right, your second formulation was saying something is deoraita, what you say is derabanan. And therefore, even if you don't go to shul, you could come up with some pasuk that has to do with Malchuyot, even if you don't remember the right psukim you're supposed to say. But saying something is indeed d'oraita. All the Gemara is saying is you don't need to go to shul because the exact formulation of which psukim is d'Rabbanan. Both formulations are found in the Achronim. So let's support Gavi answer 1 and Gavi answer 2. Okay? So, the Divrei David, so who's the Divrei David? The Divrei David is it's a Perush on Rashi ala Torah, but it's written by someone quite famous, known as Reb David Halevi Segal, better known for his work on Shulchan Aruch, which is the Taz, right? The Taz, right? So the Taz. The Taz also wrote a Perush on Rashi ala Torah called the Divrei David. Okay? So he defends Rashi. He notes, Katav Ramban, that calls out Smachta. Right? The Ramban says everything is a Smachta. Proof, the Gemara in Lamed Dalet. So how does he defend Rashi? V'li nireh devadai deoraita shetzarach lizkor al kol panim k'tzat me'elu. Elo shechachamim sidrum v'kavu bracha aleihem. Saying the psukim is deoraita, saying it in the context of brachot is derabanan. No one thinks that the Amida, I shouldn't say Shmona Esrei, it's a 9 bracha Amida in Musaf. Fine. No one thinks that the brachot of the Amida are deoraita. That's obvious. V'sham b'Gemara Ayri le'inyan sidur brachot. The Gemara is only talking about the Amida, the brachot, shesafek imhem yodim otam. So the Divrei David says, right, is Gavi's answer number 1. That Rashi thinks that saying the psukim is d'oraita, but obviously the brachot aren't, and all the Gemara on Rosh Hashanah is saying is that if you have a choice of going to a place where they're saying the Amida, right? You don't have a sitter, you don't know the Amida by heart, so if you don't go to shul, you won't hear the Amida. If you have a choice to hear the Amida or the shofar, go for the shofar. Because saying the Amida, saying the brachot, that's the Rabbanan. But the Taz says that according to Rashi, it's a given that when you go to the place where you're blowing the shofar, you're going to say some psukim, because saying psukim is d'oraita. It's only the brachot which are derabanan. Right? So the Taz very clearly says Gavi answer number 1. Now, let me get the clearest articulation of Gavi number 2. Okay, here's Gavi number 2. Okay, many Achronim say it, but here's a particular clear formulation of Gavi number 2, and that is from Ramosha Sternbach, who's still alive. He was the Av Beit Din of the Eida Charedis in Yerushalayim, originally a posek originally he's from South Africa. So in his Shuvot Van Hagot, one of his many Shuvot anyways, Shuvot Van Hagot, Chelik Dalet, Shuvah Kuf Memei, he quotes this whole problem. The Rashi says Zichron Trua, and the Ramban says okay. And here he says, what's the answer for Rashi? Lefi ze nireh. Seems to me that what? Sheberosh Hashanah af dile ikar hachiyuv de min haTorah sagi b'haskara achad. Biblically, you've got to say something. You've got to have some tefillah, some pasuk, something that accompanies the shofar blowing. Mikol makom b'chol osaf al osaf Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Biblical. And everything you add, there's a kiyum midoraita, meaning doraita you need to say something. The more you say, the better it is. And that's why he says that the Gemara says, "Uvitoratcha katuv leimor, v'lo hedi apsukim yatsa," etc. And there he says, "V'lo dami l'doraita matzinu chayagam kartanu kein zebe kama komot." He said, but it's not a doraita in the way we normally talk about doraita, because the exact way that we say it, that's derabanan. Obviously, you get a kiyum doraita, right? I mean, he goes farther. He says, "Mikom makom lechatchila yaskir asar psukim dechol safa b'malchuyot zichronot shofarot yesh bo kiyum nosaf v'amnam ikar kiyum mitzvah malchuyot hu baskar psukim the malchuyot zichronot shofarot mikom makom gam amira that tefillah v'piyutim kiyum and sheyesh malchuyot yesh bazeh kiyum mitzvah ayom." So he says something, right? He goes a little bit farther than Gavi, and he says like this, right? He says, "Look, we don't mean that it's derabanan. We mean fundamentally it's doraita. But doraita, you just need to say something, anything, right? You need to accompany the shofar blast with some pasuk, some tefillah that recognizes Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. So when the Gemara says it's derabanan, it doesn't mean it's derabanan. It means that on a biblical level, you could be yotzei by saying anything. So you don't have to go find a shul where they're saying this precise Amidah, because you can fulfill the Doraita obligation by saying literally anything that connects to the theme of Malchuyot, that connects to the theme of Zichronot, that connects to the theme of Shofarot. What we mean by Derabanan is that any formulation of how to say it, brachot, psukim, that's all Derabanan. All you got to do on Rosh Hashanah on a biblical level is mention something about God's kingship, something about God's remembrance, and something about the shofar. But Rav Sternbuch just adds a point that Gavi didn't say, which is that once you say that, you can even go farther and say that once I am davening the full Amidah, and I am saying all the psukim, there is a kiyum d'oraita. Right? There is a kiyum d'oraita because it integrates into the d'oraita chiyuv, meaning the d'oraita chiyuv is to say something. The more I say, the better, and I do fulfill a mitzvah d'oraita. So when the Gemara says it's derabanan, it doesn't even mean that saying the Amidah is derabanan. That's not true. Because once I say the Amidah, it integrates into the chiyuv d'oraisa, and it's a addition of the mitzvah d'oraisa. All the Gemara means by saying that it's derabanan is that you could get away with less on a biblical level, and the obligation to do it through the Amidah, through the recitation of Psukim, that is derabanan. And therefore, if I have to choose the exact structure of the Amidah and the Psukim, or the Shofar, I'll always pick the Shofar. But saying something, praying in some way, reflecting verbally the themes of Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot on Rosh Hashanah in some way, shape, or form, that's biblical. And when you actually choose to do it through the Shmones, through the Amidah, that actually integrates into the biblical chiyuv. And therefore he says, and he adds at the end of the tshuva, that v'nira od, furthermore, the etzem habakashot v'atachanunim shanu mitpalim b'yom rashanu aviyunu b'shabbat shamayim, the very prayers we say, he gufa hakara b'malchuto. Why is that a kiyum of Malchuyot? Because praying to God, is a recognition that God is king. Shehu hamelech v'anu makirim b'malchuto. Right? By praying to God, we recognize that He's king. Umaran hagaon de brisk zatzal. I'm not sure if he means the brisker Rav or Reb Chaim. I think he means Reb Chaim, but I'm not really sure. Nahag b'Rosh Hashanah lomar kol hayom tihilim. Had the minhag to say Tehillim all day. Levakesh rachamim b'shah shedinenu talui ve'omeid. To be praying while we're praying, right, while our judgment is being judged. V'ulai be'etzem ha'tfilah gufa yesh gam kiyum ha'akar malchuto. Maybe tefillah itself is a fulfillment of this recognition of God's kingship. Shehi mitzvah hayom de Rosh Hashanah. Right, that is the mitzvah. Meaning, the mitzvah is to, in some verbal way, recognize that God is king. When we say it's derabanan, we only mean that the precise way you say it is derabanan, but the value is d'oraita. And the more you say, the better it is, and everything will integrate into the d'oraita. And according to him, that's why either Reb Chaim or the Grizz, used to say Tehillim all day, because every verbalization of God, of recognizing God, is an integration into the biblical value of recognizing that God is King. Ki harei be'emet mi shechayav mita hamelech levad yachol lechonein oto. He said, why verbalizing? Right? Why is it that verbalizing that God is King and that God remembers us and talking much over, why is that part of the theme of Rosh Hashanah? Because he said, if you were chayav mita, right? If you were up for trial and you were already convicted, ein hamelech b'li'am, right? Every king has a nation, and without a nation, he's not a king. The fact that we turn to God on the Day of Judgment, that shows that we recognize His King, and we hope that by turning to God and recognizing Him as King, we hope that will sweeten the judgment, and that recognition of God as King will be what leads us to a positive judgment. Right? So, the Rav Moshe Sternbach says some version of what Gavi says, right? Which is verbalizing in some way that God is King. That is essential to Rosh Hashanah. That's biblical, because God is King, because He's judging you, and no matter how much you say, it'll always be integrated into the biblical obligation. The only thing the Gemara means when it says it's derabanan is that saying it in this way is derabanan. But no one ever entertained that you would go through Rosh Hashanah without in some way verbalizing the central themes of Rosh Hashanah, of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot. Right? So, Gavi 1 and Gavi 2, or as we've put it, the Divrei David and Moshe Sternbach, is either saying something, saying the Psukim is Doraita, the Brachot is Derabanan, and the Gemara on Lamed Daled is talking about the Brachot. That's the Divrei David. Or Gavi number 2, which is Rav Moshe Sternbach, is saying something is Doraita, everything after that is Derabanan, but caveat is it'll integrate back into Doraita, but obviously once I've been Yotze the minimal chiyuv, if I have a choice between maximizing how I verbalize the themes of Rosh Hashanah or hearing the shofar, I'll go for the shofar, which the only way to fulfill the biblical obligation of shofar is blowing the shofar. Right, that's Rav Moshe Sternbach or Gavi 2. Okay, what else? Right, how else might we defend Rashi? And you know, I like going through this just because, you know, yesterday I knew some of these, but I went and I collected a few more. Is I think each of the answers, right, cuts to the theme, the very nature of Rosh Hashanah. Right, because what you see from these answers emerging is Rav Moshe Sternbach is saying, right, davening is actually biblically part of how Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be celebrated, because it's essential to recognizing that God is King. The fact that the technicalities are derabanan doesn't change the fact that this is essential for Rashi to what Rosh Hashanah is all about. Right? Or the Divrei David. Saying psukim is essential. The brachot, okay, that's an addition. We frame the psukim. But saying psukim, that is essential, right? We're supposed to talk to God, say something. That is what Rosh Hashanah is about. Okay. How else? Right? How else might we defend Rashi? I think we might have time for one more answer today. Maybe. Now it could be that you're fine with this, that we have two good answers from Gavi, which both are supported in the Achronim, but let's see if we can at least get out one more answer. There are at least two important answers that I want to see today. One is actually the earliest, I think, answer, which is the Ritva, which we've mentioned several times, which I think we have to see because it is, I think, the earliest solution to this problem. And I really like Rav Asher Weiss's solution, so I do want to see that also. But let's see which else we get today. Okay? Yuri, come on. Gavi's given us two answers that have been supported in the Achronim. Let's hear what you have to say. How might you defend Rashi?
How might I defend Rashi other than...
I know we've defended him in two good ways, so we're, we've already knocked off two, so now your job is harder. You got to think of an answer that we haven't already said. But okay.
Again, not like the room where Yeah, saying something along the shofar is your deraisa, and then what you say is your shofar.
Right. So
different than that.
Right, something different than that. I know that Gavi took two of the more obvious answers. So let's see if you can get another one. I don't blame you if you can't. Right now we have to start getting a little bit more creative. But
I think for a second I'll see if I can.
You know what? How about this? Let's stop here for now. We've done two of the more obvious answers, right? You know, I'll just show you that the Gur Aryeh says a variation on this. I want you to think about it for tomorrow. And for tomorrow, I definitely want you to read the Ritva, because the Ritva, even though he doesn't say he's defending Rashi, is, in the end of the day, the earliest possible defense for Rashi. Okay, and it's critical that you know this Ritva in general, so definitely read the Ritva inside. And I think Rav Asher Weiss's answer, you know, as he notes, none of the other Achronim said it, but it's a really good answer. It's a really, really good answer. So try to read that inside. If you don't read all the other Achronim, that's totally fine. But think about it for tomorrow, right?
Right.
But let's just quickly look at the Gur Aryeh. Right? The Gur Aryeh is the Maharal's Perish on Rashi al HaTorah. He also brings this problem. And he says, "V'nirei lai she'ena b'rayta mefarish hakatuv d'chseich Zichronot Shua she'yomar piskei Zichronot Shofarot devadim midrabanan heim," etc. You know, actually, no. He just notes the Machlokes Ramban and Rashi. He prefers the Ramban. I'll skip over his interpretation of Rashi. Let's see so. You know, okay, I'll give you one more answer, which some of the Achronim give. This is actually the least interesting of all the answers, but it doesn't require much elaboration once I tell it to you. So some of the Achronim just say it's a Machlokes Sugyot. That's all. On Lamed Bet, it's Lamed Bet and Tet Zayin. The only person talking is Rabbi Kiva, right? Rabbi Kiva is the author of the statement on Tet Zayin, and Rabbi Kiva is the author of the statement on Lamed Bet. He's not the author of the statement on Lamed Daled. So some of the Achronim just say it's a Machlokes Sugyot, right? It's a Machlokes Sugyot, and the Ramban paskened like the Gemara on Lamed Daled, and Rashi paskened like what he understood to be Rabbi Kiva, which is Tet Zayin and Lamed Bet. Right? That's a very not lumdish answer. It's a very easy answer, which is to say that the Machlokes Rashi Ramban is a Machlokes Rabbi Kiva. According to Rashi, is a Machlokes Rabbi Kiva, and I think Rabbi Eliezer. That's all. That's all. Right? Very easy. So that's a third answer. It's a very easy answer. It's a very smooth answer. It doesn't require much conceptual analysis. It just, the downside obviously is that you would have to say that Rashi would think that if you had a choice between blowing the shofar and saying the brachot, you actually wouldn't choose blowing the shofar necessarily, right? Because in order to say it's a Machlokes Sugyot, you actually have to assume that Rashi would reject the halachic conclusion of Daf Lamed Bet, and that, you know, that's quite a move. But I did see that in at least one, right? Achron, 1 second. Where did I find it? Whatever. I'll look at it tomorrow. I think it was in this long piece that I put from the Maimer Mordechai, but I have to check if that's who I put it from. But that is the third answer. Okay, but tomorrow I want you to try to read the Ritva, which let me make sure that it made it onto the sheet. Yes, it did. It's the second, right? The Ritva and the Rav Asher Weiss are the two final sources on the sheet. Make sure you see those. If you have time to see some of the other Achronim, great. But the Ritva has far-reaching implications way beyond our sugya, so it's worth knowing. And Rav Asher Weiss, I think, is maybe the most lumdish read of this Gemara, but I think it really adds a lot to the understanding of the sugya according to Rashi. So I think it's important to see. If you want to look at the other Achronim, great. So you guys are okay with 12 tomorrow? That's okay?
12 and 7, 11.
Yeah, I think tomorrow I need to pick up I think I need to pick up Ezra, so that's usually between like 11:30 and 12. So like 12ish, maybe a little bit earlier. I'm not really sure.
That's fine. Well, we'll be in debate, so.
Okay, so we'll be in touch then. You know, if 11 ends up working out, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, we'll assume shear, and that's the sources I would focus on. And okay, great. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you.